Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here today. Hope you're all doing absolutely excellent. Today, we're gathering to talk about a topic that you know is near and dear to my heart. I've talked about it a million times, and that is the economy of the games industry. It was something I originally just didn't care about. I'm here to talk about the games, man. But all of a sudden, I start seeing these $80 games and developers doing crazy business practices like, hey, pay $100 to get this game before the arbitrary release date. And yeah, suddenly that topic sucks you in, especially as an indie developer. It definitely interests me to see where the money's going in this industry and how it's being spent. What we see here is an article from gamesindustry.biz, which features ex-PlayStation executive Shawn Leaden, who really made his name during the PlayStation 4 generation, which right next to the PS2 is PlayStation's most prolific generation. It was that place that PlayStation really established a dominant foothold in gaming for the modern age. So for me, I take a lot of what Shawn Leaden says seriously. We'll be leaning into that, but we'll also be researching deeply where is the money going in the games industry and what the real problem is. And it's a spending issue. I've got many thoughts. I have a feeling this will be a chunky video, but ladies and gentlemen, if you're new here, consider subscribing. And before we begin, a quick word from today's sponsor. I love open world games. I love first person shooters. Stallcraft X is speaking to me. It's got a living open world sandbox. It's a PvPvE extraction shooter. It's doing a lot of cool things here. Let's talk a bit about it. When you're out in what's called the exclusion zone, you're going to get quests, random events. There's going to be other players that'll threaten you, and you can decide how you want to navigate this map. As you do so, you're going to find gear and weapons that you can upgrade and customize. But let's say you want to warm up a little bit. Like maybe you don't want to dive in all the prep work that an extraction shooter requires. This also supports deathmatch and gun games. You can do like 10 minutes of just pure PvP action before really hitting the sticks with some true extraction shooting. There's 4 factions for you to navigate throughout this open world: the free-roaming Dawn, the militarized Frontier, the ruthless Mercenaries, and the fanatical Covenant, and each have their own quest line. So there's just a lot to do here. So if you're interested, go ahead and jump into the zone, enter my code, and use the link in the description down below to grab exclusive rewards from my channel. Shout out to Stallcraft X for sponsoring today's video. So people are spending less on video games, as illustrated by this article. Matt Piscatella of Circana shows this in a chart here. And what we take away from this is specifically double the amount of people are planning to spend less on gaming, but just generally speaking, less money is being spent on gaming and more on things like groceries, households. And why is that the case? Well, right now, given the state of the economy generally speaking, you have to be very picky about where you're spending your money because it can shorten up fast on the things you need to live, your groceries, or I can speak from experience, interest rates on your house be crazy right now. Of course, the fear of tariffs and how that impacts the economy of objects produced around the globe. However, gaming always seemed to be immune from these things. And that was a claim made back in 2008 where they said gaming was recession proof because despite us entering a bit of a recession, gaming still continued to grow. And while people look at data and charts for this stuff, I do feel as a gamer, there is more of a tangible argument to be made based on just what we were getting during that period of time. First off, they were consistently better games in many ways, right? This is subjective, of course, but games couldn't do everything or be anything back then because it was either a technical or a budgetary limit. Now the market is huge, technology is more powerful than ever, and developers are commanding budgets larger than ever. And back on the 360 and PS3, you just had to pick a type of game you had to be in. It's not like nowadays where you could look at a game like Crimson Desert and you could be 15 different things at once, and that is your whole marketing pitch. Now, while it wasn't necessarily planned this way, I've become a believer that the guardrails established from older generations were actually a positive thing for game development. And now it's become a matter of self-restraint, which that varies from person to person. Not everyone has it. The limitations of the technology on, say, the 360 or the PS3 forced innovation. You had to think creatively to achieve your larger vision. Budgets were smaller, both due to the market, but also what was even possible at the time. And also the economy, what people were being paid at the time, what they needed to live at the time. Leaden himself even mentions how if the story, environment, and characters are right, that photorealism doesn't matter. And I think when you look at the top selling games of this year, that is very much supported, whether it's a release back in April in Oblivion Remastered, which, yeah, that is not chasing photorealism. It looks good, but it's a crazy fantasy game. It's janky. It's $50. It's AA energy, and that's where a lot of the growth is, and obviously people are willing to spend their money there. Or if you want a more recent example, we've talked about it extensively both here on Retro Rebound, Mafia the Old Country is seeing some pretty strong sales out the gate for a $50 title as well. So these games are finding themselves in a pocket that people are appreciating and spending money on. And so I think, and also this is mentioned in the article, that the growth is going to be found in those AA projects where you have the flexibility of prior generations because of the lower budgets, and so you have to be more creative. But since technology has come so far along, you still have these games looking really good where you still question with certain titles like, is that AA? Secondly, and this is a really big one of why gaming was recession proof in 2008, we had way less content to wade through back then. There's plenty of great games nowadays. It's just almost impossible to find some of them, or when you find them, it's a time issue. So A, it's overwhelming, and B, even if you're mounting up your Steam wish list and you're really interested in every game coming out, nobody in this world has the time to play all of these games, whether it's because they're endless or there's just a volume of good stuff coming out. And I don't know if there's a real solution to it, but there's no denying that when the market was smaller, the flood of games was also smaller. And so the most you'd get is maybe like 2 in a month. Now we get like 3 big games in a week. It's ridiculous. I also think it's how gamers were raised. If you're raised on free iPad games and suddenly you're throwing an $80 price tag for a video game, you're probably going to recoil at that. And now you're mainly selling to people like me, the same people you've been selling to for a while and who know the business, but you're having trouble appealing to the new generation to grow the gaming business. But I also think that gaming's spine shouldn't be so flimsy and bend to the new way. Like, oh, they played apps when they were younger. That's the same as our console games. We have to change the whole business strategy and give these things out for free and nickel and dime our way to that $60, $70, $80 price tag and beyond. Like, that same generation grew up with streaming apps in their houses. They're watching movies and TV in a non-traditional way, and yet still theaters managed to bounce back in a pretty meaningful way after the pandemic. They went to a significant low where people thought, that's it, it's done, it's dead. And while it's not back to exactly where it was, it did crawl dramatically out of a hole that I don't think people talk enough about, where theaters are still very much relevant to the point where even big streaming successes, like, say, the recently released K-pop Demon Hunters, which I just watched last night, by the way, pretty good stuff, not gonna lie. I really like that song Golden, really good. But anyway, this stuff becomes so big, it goes to the theater and it becomes an event, an experience. It's very concert-like, where, yeah, I have my Spotify and I fall in love with artists and I think they're great, but you go to the concert for the experience. And part of gaming is like, yeah, you can get the app for free on your iPad, but you're not getting like an incredible, you know, for me, a Knights of the Republic, a full-scale Fallout game. I'm not getting that on an app for free on my iPad. I'm getting a heavily compromised product there that's likely asking me for money every step of the way. And I think if gaming was a little more strong-willed and not so desperate with leadership, I think this wouldn't be a big problem, because sticking with it is a thing. A perfect example of hanging with something is the Tomb Raider reboot trilogy. In fact, it's one of the best examples in gaming and one of the most under-discussed. When this game first came out in 2013 and kicked off this new trilogy, it looked like kind of a lost effort. 3.5 million sales, okay, that's pretty good for the time, but Square Enix says it doesn't meet expectations, famously so. This goes on to sell 14.5 million units and makes it the best-selling entry in the franchise over time. You move down the line a little bit more. Okay, we were wrong about that. Let's do Rise of the Tomb Raider, but we're going to do it as a console exclusive to secure that bag because we're still a little bit unsure about this thing. Famously so, it's announced as an Xbox One exclusive. People are mad it's an Xbox One exclusive because Xbox One sucks at the time, even though PlayStation was money-hatting a ton of games. But it goes on to eventually sell, after flopping, 11.8 million units by November 2021. Again, it's a specific example, but look at what you can build. And this isn't just sales over time. The entire trilogy, including Shadow of the Tomb Raider, accounts for 38 million copies sold. That's hanging with something. I think part of the problem with gaming and this sort of recession-proof approach to it is that you actually hung with things back then. You actually got a trilogy done in a short period of time, which gave people motivation where, hey, 2 years, 3 years after that Tomb Raider reboot came out, I got a sequel. I'm going to check out the old entry. I'm going to pick that up. Sure, it might not be a sale at $60, but that fan base is huge. And of course, we know Tomb Raider is massive. That is one of the main reasons I think gaming is in a peculiar spot. It's not just the span of which it takes to get to a full trilogy. I look at Final Fantasy VII Remake, as fantastic as it is, it's going to take upwards of 3 generations to get that full story done. But it's not even that here. It's just the ability to hang with something, and if it's not explosive out the gate, letting it recover on the market. I think a great example of this too is Remedy and their games. They always come out flat, but make a ton of money off the back end through word of mouth, through reviews, through retrospectives, and just through sheer product quality. It's not going to be the business for everybody, but I do think a lot of these publishers are so reactive to those first 3 months on the market when you clearly hang with it and you can get something big out of it. So still sticking with this 2008 recession-proof reasoning, let's go to number 3. And perhaps the most important, I think the price was right. Nintendo has pushed the limit of game pricing past the now already high $70 to $80. GTA 6 is up next. Who knows where that's going to be? Meanwhile, you have games like Expedition, Mafia, Oblivion Remastered having strong successes at the $50 price point. Titles like The Outer Worlds 2 and Borderlands 4 have now balked at $80 and have settled at, again, the still very high $70. Now, ex-PlayStation executive Shawn Leaden did suggest that maybe game prices could have crawled up every generation because now companies are eating their profit margins to keep games in an acceptable area. But the answer for a lot of these companies has been to nickel and dime you the whole way, and that used to be reserved for multiplayer games. But nowadays, this is even a solution for single-player games. I think it's just not labeled as such. I think excluding Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 this year, pretty much every major RPG is guilty of this, even ones I adore. Let's use one not viewed as favorably, Starfield. That game needed serious work out the gate to get to where it needs to be, and we'll still see if with the upcoming updates Bethesda nails that. But even a positive example, Cyberpunk 2077 kind of kicked down the door in a lot of ways on what these single player games can do. And it's basically a live product at this point where it's never safe to start a new playthrough because there's usually new content on the way. So you get these unfinished games that get patched, and then people who wait years play it and love it, and there are people who played it at launch that are very jaded by it. That, or you have these games that are coming out at like $70, but hey, if you pay $90, $100 even, which is where The Outer Worlds 2 was at one point, you get early access. Like, this is our release date, but this is how early you're going to get it. When these prices are out of control, companies are taking the safe route, which again goes back to the price is right. When the price was right, we were willing as consumers to take more chances. Now the price isn't right, so we want a safer bet. Companies know that. They want a safer bet. Why do you think EA, who talked a ton of shit about their Star Wars deal and wanted out of it so bad, publicly so even, still went back to work with Disney on a bunch of exclusive products? They know that this is the safer bet, that you might embrace Star Wars more than a new IP. And yes, that's even with the Star Wars brand in the state it's in. Fourth, and this is likely the least impactful, to be honest, but I think the ability to access a full product or a sample size of a product was much easier back then, which made us kind of vet out our purchases more. Like, a big part of the marketing process back then was the demo. You also had rental services for at least the hardcore gamer, like a Blockbuster or a Hollywood Video, that were really useful. Like, that's how I tested a lot of things I would eventually buy, unless it was a brand I knew. Again, we're kind of going back full circle here. Like, oh, I know I love Star Wars because I enjoyed Episode 3. Of course I'm going to buy Knights of the Old Republic when I saw it in Circuit City. But when I go to something like a Blockbuster and I play the game for a couple hours and I've rented it for a week, I will probably go back to Blockbuster if I really like it and pay for the whole thing right there. You kind of have this nowadays with Steam refunds. You can abuse that 2-hour window if you really want to, but I think it's more of a gray area. This was more of like a business model that we could lean into and try something out over, in the case of Blockbuster, the course of a week. So these are the things that I believe made gaming recession proof. There's a lot of other factors that go into it, but to me, these are some of the key elements. So what's different nowadays is that the answer to recession-proof gaming is just to make gaming as cheap as humanly possible, despite paying these incredible budgets. So free-to-play games are all the rave now. Everything from ones I do love, like Marvel Rivals, to some gigantic titles that I don't play at all, like a Fortnite or a Roblox, completely take over the industry. This is a far cry from where multiplayer gaming once was, where it was either packed in the rushed part of a single player game. You know, I'm thinking of like your Mass Effect multiplayer, your BioShock 2 multiplayer, or if you're an EA game, giving an online pass to make sure people had to pay to get in. That was the standard. It was a business model in a weird way, where if you didn't buy that game sealed, you had to buy a separate online pass to get online with your friends. But now if you're a multiplayer game and you are telling people to pay for that multiplayer game, you're dead on arrival. Like, you need to be free, and all of your money needs to be made through cosmetics, or maybe, if done right, a battle pass. According to this article though, 77% of the entire gaming market is made up of in-game monetization. So if you're wondering why, hey, how about PlayStation? They continue to try live service even after a canceled Naughty Dog project and both Marathon and Concord respectively blow up in their face. Why do they keep going? This is why, because most of the spending is being done there, because there's a whole generation of gamers who have come in and said, games should be free, I'm going to spend my time here, and these games become money pits where they don't leave them, because it's like, bro, over time they assess, I've spent like $300, $400, $500 on this game. I don't want to go anywhere else because my monetary investment is here. It's a lot like MMOs and subscription services and attaching yourself to that character where the game becomes work. The other difference nowadays in that sort of race to the bottom is there are just free games everywhere. Like Humble Bundle had it where, granted, at times it wasn't free, but you pay like $5, $2, and you get tons of crazy games just in that package. Epic Games, they give away free games constantly, and good ones at that, to get you into their launcher. This isn't free, but the Steam sale is obviously very well known, and we all are guilty of just impulse buying because there's so many good deals. Subscription services are all the rave. PS Plus has always had the packed in games, and then you had games with gold. Games with gold has gone away, and Game Pass is now a big part of, to many people, the problem. Shawn Leaden had thoughts on this, and this is likely the part of the article you did see floating around. Because while he doesn't dive into the is it profitable conversation whatsoever, he looks at it from the angle of developers and says that they're becoming wage slaves. Leaden references creating value in things such as profit sharing or overages. Instead, it's paying someone X dollars an hour to build a game and to put it on servers. And he views this as uninspiring for game developers who are ultimately artists. I think this is why you get very sterile, lacking of passion projects, because of how developers are brought in. Like, contract talent is huge in this industry. There are whole-on studios that are set up to just be contract studios, to work on behalf of something for you. And one thing Leaden does lay out here is about how the phases of game development are working, where you kind of don't need certain people full-time. So what happens is game development becomes very piecemeal. Do you need a full-time concept artist if the concept art for the game is done? Do you have to fill empty hands? It sounds cold-hearted because it's just an excuse for companies to save money, but this is the type of penny pinching that is going on in light of most of the game spending being in free-to-play titles, monetization. So to me, putting it all in a nutshell, I find after reading this and doing my own research, the real problem lies in the quality of the games, which will continue to be an issue if developers are treated this way or leaders are ran out of this industry like we saw with Xbox. I think another big part of it is companies not hanging with things long enough. If you are not a roaring success out the gate where you are a safe bet for a sequel, you're not seeing the light of day. You're lucky if you get one game. 3, I do think these subscription services have changed spending habits. People are reluctant to spend money because they know they'll eventually get something for free. Even services that are less controversial, like PS Plus, have broken the way people spend their money. Game Pass obviously being the biggest contributor to that, where a whole platform is being accused, although I think sometimes wrongfully, of not spending money. And this is why you're seeing the industry knock down all these walls, because they're chasing more and more people. But as I've said a million times, and if you listen to me on podcast videos, I apologize because you've heard me say this before, it to me lies at the heart of the budget. If the budget's not addressed, these are going to persist forevermore, until even when every wall is knocked down and you can play a full console game on your phone, doesn't matter. You're still going to run into these problems because the core, the root of the issue has not been addressed, and that's the game's budget. Limitations to it, breed innovation, breed creativity. There are also times where limitations on your budget do not mean that you can make the thing you want to make. And like Glenn Schofield said recently in a LinkedIn post semi-announcing his retirement, he said some things aren't meant to be made cheaply, and that's fair too in the AAA space. So it's a conversation that's a mouthful, and there's so much to pick at here, but I do think gaming can course correct. Right now, the market, as illustrated in this article, is 10% smaller than it was in 2021 because gaming saw such a big boom during the pandemic. We are still in course correction mode, but I also think there's a level of just being overreactive, and that some things aren't going to be immediate explosive successes out the gate, and that they need time. They need to go on sale. They need word of mouth to spread. They need to reach low periods in gaming where people aren't busy with a million releases happening like earlier in the spring this year. It is that type of industry, and I feel we've been ignoring the root of it. But those are just my thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. I want to hear from you down below. Fire away. Other than that, take excellent care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.